Welcome to this CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst Certification Exam Study Guide. Let's study together and use this video along with your other study material to pass the CYSA Plus exam. These are my personal study notes I made to prepare for the CompTIA CYSA exam, in which I believe knowing how to read CVSS strings could help significantly in correctly answering many questions on the exam. Let's discuss the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. The Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS, provides a standardized way to capture the principal characteristics of a vulnerability and produce a numerical score reflecting its severity. Here is an example of a CVSS vector string for a network-based vulnerability. Let's break it down into sections. CVSS 3.1 specifies the CVSS version, in this case, version 3.1. AV, attack vector. The vulnerability is exploitable remotely over the network. AC, attack complexity. The attack complexity is low, meaning the attack can be easily conducted. PR, privileges required. No privileges are required to exploit the vulnerability. UI, user interaction. No user interaction is required for the exploit to be successful. S, scope. The impact is limited to the vulnerable component and does not affect other components. C, confidentiality impact. Successful exploitation results in a high impact on confidentiality. I, integrity impact. Successful exploitation results in a high impact on integrity. A, availability impact. Successful exploitation results in a high impact on availability. The backslashes separate the sections. The first part of the CVS vector string is the version number, which is 3.1. The second part of the CVS vector string, which is AV, that stands for attack vector. And in this case, the N stands for network. Or there can be an A, L, or P after the AV. AVN, A. Vulnerability exploitable remotely over the internet, typically at the protocol level. Example, denial of service DOS via a specially crafted TCP packet. AVA, adjacent. A vulnerability exploitable within a logically adjacent network, such as Bluetooth, NFC, or a local IP subnet. Example, ARP or neighbor discovery flood causing DOS on a local LAN segment. AVL, local. A vulnerability exploitable by accessing the system locally via physical access or through terminal emulation, or by tricking the user into performing an action. Example, exploiting through SSH or social engineering. AVP, physical. A vulnerability requiring physical access to the system. Example, cold boot attack or attacks via FireWireless DMA. AC stands for attack complexity. It can say ACL or ACH, which stands for low and high. Low is considered bad for a company. The attacker must take no measurable action to exploit the vulnerability. The attack requires no target-specific circumvention to exploit the vulnerability. An attacker can expect repeatable success against a vulnerable system. High is not as bad for a company. The successful attack depends on the evasion or circumvention of security enhancing techniques in place that would otherwise hinder the attack. These include evasion of exploit mitigation techniques. The attacker must have additional methods available to bypass security measures in place. PR stands for privileges required. The N stands for none, which is bad for a company. The attacker is unauthenticated prior to attack, and therefore does not require any access to settings or files of the vulnerable system to carry out an attack. The L stands for low, which is not as bad for a company. The attacker requires privileges that provide basic capabilities that are typically limited to settings and resources owned by a single low-privileged user. Alternatively, an attacker with low privileges has the ability to access only non-sensitive resources. The H stands for high, which is the best-case scenario for a company. The attacker requires privileges that provide significant, e.g., administrative control over the vulnerable system, allowing full access to the vulnerable system's settings and files. UI stands for user interaction. If it has the letter N after it, which means none is bad for a company. The vulnerable system can be exploited without interaction from any human user other than the attacker. Examples include a remote attacker is able to send packets to a target system. A locally authenticated attacker executes code to elevate privileges. P stands for passive, which is not as bad for a company. Successful exploitation of this vulnerability requires limited interaction by the targeted user with the vulnerable system and the attacker's payload. These interactions would be considered involuntary and do not require that the user actively subvert protections built into the vulnerable system. A stands for active, which is the best scenario for a company. Successful exploitation of this vulnerability requires a targeted user to perform specific conscious interactions with a vulnerable system and the attacker's payload, or the user's interactions would actively subvert protection mechanisms, which would lead to exploitation of the vulnerability. S stands for scope. The U stands for unchanged. The impact is limited to the vulnerable component and does not affect other components. This is not too bad for a company. The C stands for confidentiality. The H stands for high. Successful exploitation results in a high impact on confidentiality. This is bad for a company. The I stands for integrity. The H stands for high. Successful exploitation results in a high impact on integrity. This is bad for a company. The A stands for availability. The H stands for high. Successful exploitation results in a high impact on availability. This is also not good for a company. Let's recap. The CVSS vector string starts with the version number. AVN is the attack vector network, or A is adjacent. L means local. P means physical. ACL is attack complexity low, can be low or high. PRN is privileges required none, can be low or high or none. UIN is user interaction none, can be low or high or none. SU is scope unchanged. CH is confidentiality high impact, can be low or high. IH is integrity high impact, can be low or high. AH is availability high impact, can be low or high. Thank you for watching our video tutorial. We hope you found it informative. Please feel free to leave a comment or let me know if I made a mistake in this video. Stay safe and secure.